The last thing Michael Carter expected on that freezing November morning was for a stranger's phone to change everything. He'd been invisible for 3 years, just another forgotten face on the corner of Fifth and Madison. But in 48 hours, 12 million people would know his name. And the reason why would break your heart before it healed it. Michael hadn't always lived on the streets of downtown Portland. There was a time when he wore a uniform with pride, when he had a home, a wife, a daughter who called him her hero. Staff Sergeant Michael Carter had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, leading his unit through some of the most dangerous territory imaginable. He'd saved lives. He'd been decorated for bravery. But nobody tells you that sometimes the hardest battle starts when you come home. The nightmares began 6 months after his return. He'd wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, seeing faces of people he couldn't save. His wife, Jennifer, tried everything. She held him through the panic attacks, drove him to VA appointments, begged him to talk to someone. But Michael couldn't find the words. How do you explain to someone who wasn't there what it feels like to carry ghosts everywhere you go? The drinking started slowly, just a beer to calm his nerves. Then 2, then a bottle. Jennifer found him passed out in their daughter Emma's room one night, and that's when she knew she had to make the hardest decision of her life. She didn't want to leave God. She didn't want to. But Emma was only 7 years old, and she was starting to flinch every time Michael raised his voice. Jennifer left a note on the kitchen table, took Emma to her mother's house in Seattle, and just like that, Michael lost everything that mattered. He tried to hold it together. He really did. But the VA appointments had 6-month waiting lists. The bills piled up faster than his disability checks could cover. And when the bank foreclosed on a house, Michael found himself with a duffel bag, $200, and nowhere to go. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of shelters and soup kitchens and sleeping under bridges. 3 years of watching people look right through him like he was a ghost. But Michael had one thing left, one piece of his old life that nobody could take away. His voice. Before the military, before everything fell apart, Michael had dreamed of being a singer. His mother used to say he had an angel's voice. So every morning, he'd sit on the corner of Fifth and Madison with his old guitar, the one thing he refused to pawn, and he'd sing. Not for money, really. The few dollars people tossed in his case barely bought him a meal. He sang, because it was the only time he felt like himself again. The only time the ghosts went quiet. Most people walked right past him. Some dropped coins without even looking. But Michael kept singing. He sang old country songs his father taught him. He sang gospel hymns his mother loved. And sometimes, when he was feeling brave, he sang the lullaby he used to sing to Emma before bedtime. Those were the hardest days, when he wondered if his daughter even remembered what he looked like. On this particular November morning, the wind cut through Michael's thin jacket like knives. His fingers were so cold, he could barely form the chords on his guitar. The morning rush was in full swing. Hundreds of people in expensive coats rushing to warm offices, clutching their fancy coffee cups. Michael started singing an old Willie Nelson song, his breath forming small clouds in the frozen air. Nobody stopped. Nobody even slowed down, until she did. Sarah Morrison was running late for work. Again, the 34-year-old marketing executive was juggling her phone, her coffee, and her laptop bag when she heard it. A voice so pure, so haunting, that it stopped her mid-step. She turned around and saw him, a man who looked like he'd been forgotten by the world, sitting against a brick wall with a battered guitar, singing like his life depended on it. Sarah didn't know why she did what she did next. Maybe it was the way his voice cracked with emotion on certain words. Maybe it was the pain she saw in his eyes. But she pulled out her phone and started recording. She wasn't thinking about likes or shares or going viral. She just knew that something about this moment needed to be captured. Something real in a world that felt increasingly fake. Michael didn't notice her at first. He was lost in the music, his eyes closed, pouring everything he had left into that song. When he finished, Sarah stepped forward and dropped a $20 bill in his guitar case. Their eyes met for just a second, and Sarah saw something that would haunt her for days, a depth of sorrow that no human being should have to carry alone. She went to work, but she couldn't stop thinking about him. During her lunch break, she did something impulsive. She posted the video on her social media with a simple caption: "This man has more talent in his voice than most people I hear on the radio. But he's singing on a street corner in the freezing cold while the world walks by. We can do better than this." Sarah had about 3,000 followers. She expected maybe a few likes, maybe a couple of shares. What happened next shocked everyone. By the time Sarah left work that evening, the video had been viewed 50,000 times. By the next morning, it had hit 2 million. People were sharing it everywhere: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. News outlets were picking it up. But here's what made it different from every other viral video of a homeless person. People wanted to know his story. Who was he? How did he end up there? And how could they help? Michael had no idea any of this was happening. He spent that night in a shelter, ate a bowl of soup, and went to sleep on a thin mattress surrounded by 50 other forgotten souls. When he woke up and made his way to his usual corner the next morning, he noticed something strange. People were actually looking at him, really looking at him, like they saw him for the first time. Then a young woman approached him, her phone in her hand, and said, "Oh my God, it's you? You're the singing veteran everyone's talking about." Michael had no idea what she meant. He didn't own a phone. He didn't have internet access. He was completely unaware that his face was being seen by millions of people across the country. The woman showed him the video, showed him the comments, thousands upon thousands of them. People calling his voice a gift from God. People sharing their own struggles with PTSD. Veterans reaching out, saying they understood. And people asking the same question over and over: how can we help him? Michael's hands shook as he scrolled through the comments. For 3 years, he'd been invisible. And now, suddenly he was seen. But it wasn't the attention that made his eyes fill with tears. It was one comment in particular, from a username that made his heart stop. Emma_Carter_2016. "That's my dad," it said. "I've been looking for him for so long." Sarah Morrison saw that comment too. She'd been monitoring the video obsessively, overwhelmed by the response. When she saw Emma's comment, she knew she had to do something. She sent Emma a private message, and within an hour, they were on the phone. Emma was 16 now, no longer the 7-year-old girl Michael remembered. She was in Seattle with her mother, and she'd been searching for her father for years. Jennifer had tried to find Michael after she'd gotten sober herself, after she'd understood that leaving had been about protection, not abandonment. But Michael had disappeared into the system, into the invisible world of homelessness, where people lose their identities along with their addresses. Emma checked missing persons databases. She searched social media. She never stopped hoping that somehow, someday, she'd find him. What happened over the next 3 days was nothing short of miraculous. Sarah set up a crowdfunding page to help Michael get back on his feet. Within 24 hours, it had raised over $300,000. A local veterans organization reached out, offering immediate housing and comprehensive PTSD treatment. A music producer in Nashville saw the video and offered to record a demo. But none of that mattered to Michael, as much as the phone call he received on day 3. Sarah had arranged everything. She'd gotten Michael a temporary phone, coordinated with Emma and Jennifer, and set up a video call. When Michael saw his daughter's face on that screen, 9 years older, but with the same eyes, the same smile, he broke down completely. Emma was crying too, saying the words he'd dreamed of hearing for 3 years. "Dad, I never stopped loving you. Please come home." The reunion happened 1 week later. Sarah documented it with permission, and if you think the first video was powerful, you should have seen this one. Michael stepped off a bus in Seattle, cleaned up, clear-eyed, wearing donated clothes that actually fit. Emma ran to him across that parking lot like she was 7 years old again, and when they embraced, there wasn't a dry eye anywhere in sight. Jennifer was there too, and the conversation they had was hard and honest and full of tears. She apologized for leaving the way she did. He apologized for pushing her away. They both acknowledged that sometimes love means making impossible choices, and that healing isn't linear. It's messy and painful and takes longer than anyone wants. They weren't getting back together as a couple, but they were committed to being a family again, to helping Michael heal, to giving Emma her father back. The crowdfunding money changed everything. Michael moved into a small apartment near Emma and Jennifer. He started intensive therapy through a veterans program that actually had resources, that actually cared. He joined a support group of other veterans struggling with PTSD, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. He started performing at local venues, small coffee shops, and community centers. And his audience grew not because of the viral video, but because people heard his story and his music and felt something real. 6 months later, Michael recorded his first album. It was called Fifth and Madison, named after the corner where everything changed. The album featured original songs he'd written about his journey, about war, about loss, about hitting rock bottom and finding your way back. But it also featured that lullaby he used to sing to Emma, the one that brought him the tears on the hardest days. They recorded it together, father and daughter, their voices blending in a harmony that spoke of separation and reunion, of pain and healing. The album didn't top the charts. Michael didn't become a superstar, but it didn't matter because he'd already gotten everything he needed. He had his daughter back. He had a relationship with her that grew stronger every day. He had a purpose again, speaking at veterans events, sharing his story, helping other homeless veterans find resources and hope. He used a significant portion of the crowdfunding money to start a nonprofit that provided instruments and music therapy to homeless veterans, because he knew firsthand the power of music to keep you human when the world tries to make you disappear. Emma introduced him to her boyfriend, asked his advice about college, invited him to her high school graduation. All the moments he thought he'd lost forever were being given back to him, one precious day at a time. Jennifer remarried eventually, to a good man who shook Michael's hand and thanked him for his service, who understood that families can be complicated and that loving Emma meant respecting her father. Sarah Morrison and Michael stayed in touch. She attended his first real concert, brought her own family, and cried through half the songs. She never sought credit for posting that video. She didn't want fame or recognition. But Michael made sure everyone knew that she was the bridge, the person who saw him when he was invisible, who refused to just walk past another forgotten soul. In his interviews, he always said the same thing. Sarah didn't make me visible. She reminded everyone else to open their eyes. 2 years after that freezing November morning, Michael stood on a stage at a veterans benefit concert. The auditorium held 3,000 people. He looked out at the crowd and saw Emma in the front row, holding up her phone to record him, just like Sarah had done on that street corner. Before he sang, Michael spoke into the microphone, his voice steady and strong. "I spent 3 years being invisible," he said. 3 years thinking my story was over, that I'd use up all my chances. But here's what I learned. You're never as invisible as you think you are. Someone always sees you. Someone always cares. And sometimes all it takes is one person with a kind heart and a phone camera to remind the world that every person has value. Every story matters. And it's never too late for a second chance. He started playing his guitar, and the auditorium went silent. It was that same Willie Nelson song he'd been singing on the corner of Fifth and Madison, but this time it sounded different. This time it sounded like hope. This time, when Michael Carter sang, he wasn't singing to survive. He was singing because he was alive again, because he'd been found. Because somewhere between the darkness and the light, between the concrete and the stars, grace had met him exactly where he was. And in the front row, his daughter smiled through her tears, watching her hero remember who he'd always been. That's the thing about rock bottom. Sometimes you have to fall all the way down before you can be lifted all the way up. Sometimes being broken is the first step to being whole. And sometimes, just sometimes, the worst moment of your life is right before the best moment begins. You just have to hold on long enough to see it. Michael did. And if you're struggling right now, if you feel invisible, if you think nobody sees you, hold on. Your video might be coming. Your Sarah might be right around the corner. Your Emma might be searching for you even now. Because you matter. Your story isn't over. And the world needs your voice, even if right now it feels like nobody's listening. Keep singing. Someone will hear you. And when they do, everything can change.